Aloha, welcome to the Live Ukulele podcast. My name is Brad Bordessa, and in this episode, we're going to continue on with the idea of tone from the previous episode, but in this one, I want to give you some practical demonstrations and examples and share some ways that you can improve your tone when you are touching your ukulele, playing your ukulele, different ways you can interact to improve that sound. This episode is brought to you by Groove Ukulele, a PDF ebook guide to strumming. Through the lessons in Groove Ukulele, you'll learn to lock into the rhythm of a song and how to intuitively strum a part that complements the music. Say goodbye to robotic strumming and hello to a simple system that will help you play in time and with more confidence. If you're more of a visual learner, don't worry, the ebook comes with 25 HD video lessons so you can see all the tricks I use in action. No more struggling with rhythm, no more asking for strumming patterns. Groove Ukulele is your ticket to understanding rhythm on the uke and taking it to the next level. Get the ebook and videos today for less than the price of a private lesson and enjoy 70 pages and over 3 hours of video that will serve you for the rest of your musical journey. Visit liveukulele.com/groove now and start strumming with style. If you're not already, I want to invite you to go subscribe to my newsletter. It's a great way for us to stay in touch, and a lot of times I use it as kind of a sounding board for some of the stuff I'm working on, to share news about what I'm up to, but also to let people kind of have feedback and provide me with a sense of what you folks would like me to work on or how I can improve what I'm doing to better serve you. It's free, and I like to think that it's nice and useful. If you want to check it out, you can go to liveukulele.com/sign up, or there's now a sign up form. That's what they call it, is a form on the homepage of Live Ukulele. You can actually go check out the front page of the website and look. I kind of redesigned it, made it look a little bit more modern and sharp. But let's get right into it. Talking about tone, we have kind of the theoretical aspect, which I talked about last time, what it is, how it's different from timbre, some people maybe you should listen to who have nice tone, those things. If you missed it, please go have a listen. I think that it's kind of some good kind of backstory of what we're going to be talking about here. But right here and right now, I want to try and share some practical examples of what tone is, how you can change it. I think the place to start is with the adjustment of the inherent sound that you can make. Changing, like we think of tone as the tone knob on a stereo. If you're old enough to remember a stereo that might have a tone knob on it, where it changes from an emphasis on the lows to an emphasis on the highs. We can do the same thing with tone on our ukulele, depending on where we pluck the strings, right? So if I play a chord in like the normal position, it has a nice round fullness to the sound. But if I change where my picking hand is picking, like right there where I'm picking, I'm playing over the end of the fretboard, like kind of between the sound hole and where the neck meets the body. That's a typical good place to strum. You're going to get a nice, even, balanced sound. But if I move my hand up the neck towards my fretting hand, I start to get a little bit more of a twang, a brightness. It doesn't have the full sound anymore. And the attack changes, right? It becomes more snappy as I play the strings. And a similar thing happens when you go the other direction from kind of your middle ground round sound. If you go towards the bridge, it gets brighter until it becomes almost kind of banjo-y the way that the sound comes out. And so if you listen to different players, you'll notice that they kind of land in different areas on that tonal spectrum just by itself, like how you express a chord or a picking line when you play it. You can have different modes. I can play those are kind of three different vibes that you can get just by moving your right hand back and forth along the string of the ukulele to play in a different spot physically on the string. But like there are characteristics of each of those things that some players kind of embody. Like if you listen to Troy Fernandez is playing back towards the bridge. Right? I don't play anything like Troy Fernandez, but if you listen to Ka'au Crater Boy's songs or even the Hawaiian Style Ukulele CD, which is a wonderful CD, by the way, probably one of my favorite ukulele albums, Hawaiian Style Ukulele by Troy Fernandez. Right, that's not anything like how Troy plays because I've never really studied his style or tried to emulate his style too much. But that tone, that's a Troy tone. That's how he plays, is way super far back, and that's part of his signature sound. Whereas if you play kind of more in the middle of the strings, a more neutral sound, that's where a lot of the more modern players tend to sound. Like Herb plays here. Just like as kind of balanced as you could possibly be right there in the middle. And there's different situations where you're going to want to have one sound or the other. And there is no right or wrong. It's just different ways of expressing. Like, for instance, that happy medium zone between where the neck meets the body and the sound hole, that's a great place for strumming. But if you pick up there, like single notes, it kind of has a pillowy sort of a sound. Whereas if you move a little bit back, more over the sound hole, those notes have a little bit more definition and they're a little bit clearer and you lose the pillowy sound. So a lot of times, like when I'm playing between strumming and picking, I'll actually change where my picking hand and my strumming hand is. And when I'm strumming, I'll play kind of over the end of the fretboard. And now there, I'm more over the sound hole because it's giving me that definition. It's letting those single notes pop out. Because when you strum, you have to think that you're creating 4 times as much sound, or an extra 3 times as much sound, however you want to think about it, by having all the strings ringing at once. Whereas if you're playing one string, that's a lot less power and you need to still be able to project it out. So changing the tone to be a little bit brighter, usually you hear brighter things as louder. So by making that little adjustment, you can kind of cheat your ears into matching the volume of those two completely different styles of playing. All right. So experiment with that. Try moving your strumming hand and your picking hand back and forth. Physically, I see a lot of people who strum like back over the sound hole by the bridge. It's hard to strum there because the strings are stiff because there's like the leverage on them is wrong because you're right next to one of their fastening points. The saddle and the bridge is holding the string tight right there. So it's harder to actually physically pass through the strings because they're stiff and they're actually further apart right there. So if you move up to over the end of the fretboard, you're going to have less resistance. The string's going to kind of bounce around your finger a little bit, and the strings are a little bit closer together. And so I encourage people to, pay attention to where you're strumming. And if you're strumming back over the sound hole or over kind of the dead zone between the sound hole and the bridge, bring your hand up. And a lot of times you'll get a more round, warm sound, and it'll be easier to pass your finger over the strings. So that's like the very broad overview is kind of warm sound, brighter, snappier sound. Those are some easy things you can adjust by moving your hand back and forth along the string. But there are so many other ways that you can control the tone of what you play by how you manipulate your hand as it hits the string, and even your left hand. And I think the next thing to touch on maybe is coordination, because this isn't necessarily directly related to tone itself, but if you're not coordinated, what you play is going to sound sloppy regardless, and it's going to sound like your technique sucks. So what I'm talking about when I say coordination, and I don't even know if I can play an example, but nicely coordinated would be you press down a fret just in the nick of time so that when you pick the string, everything is there and ready to go to create a clean note. And when you move to the next note, it's all pretty clean. And you can hear there's a couple goobers in there where I wasn't as coordinated as I should have been. And that's where your left hand is pressing out of sync with when your right hand is playing. And what you want to try and do is bring those as closely coordinated as possible. That allows you to play faster. If you can't coordinate when playing slow, you definitely are not going to be able to do it fast. So you start by playing things well slowly, right? If I pick just something, let me see if I can play it. If I can play it off, so like it's like I can't even do it. I've trained myself not to do it. But what you'll end up hearing is that you'll either pick when the string is dead because your finger is still pressing down onto it, or you'll pick when your finger is leaving and you'll get a buzz because your finger is lifting up, or you're somewhere in between. And everything's going to sound sloppy and rattly. And so what you want to try and do is tighten up your tolerances, pay attention to where your left hand is fingering, right? I always say you want to try and play so that you're 2/3 of the way up inside the fret towards the bridge. That allows you to press less with your left hand, and the notes you do play will tend to buzz less. But most of all, you want to make sure that as you're moving, that your right hand is playing in the right spot. Or, since your right hand is kind of the engine of what you play, the right hand's going to control the timing. So as long as the timing of the right hand is correct, you need to make sure that your left hand is getting to the notes in time so that the timing that the right hand is providing, assuming the timing is correct, can execute at the time it's supposed to. So a lot of times it's the left hand being behind that causes the problems. You know, we think about the left hand all the time. Like, oh, what note am I playing? What chord am I playing? How are my fingers working? But you have to think that the left hand has to actually move a little bit ahead of the right hand to get to where it needs to go. So the timing of the left hand, you're not pressing down the moment you want the note to sound. Otherwise, you're going to be picking while your finger is pressing down, making the action of pressing down. You need to be holding the note already, not a lot ahead, but a little bit ahead of when you pick, so that you get the clean sound as soon as you make the pick or the strum or whatever motion you're making. But a lot of times people don't think about that. They just kind of do it, and when it buzzes or whatever, they're like, oh, it's buzzing. Why is it buzzing? And a lot of times it's because the coordination is not there. So what I recommend is you play like the 1, 2, 3, 4 exercise, where you're just playing every fret one finger a piece. So index finger, second finger, third finger, fourth finger on each string. And you do it as slow as you need to go. You know, if you can't play it that fast, then you go slower. And you make the motions slow enough that you can observe what is going wrong. If you can't notice what's going wrong, you can't fix it. So you got to go slower and slower and slower until you can see what the problem is and then fix it. And a lot of times you're going to notice it's just the left hand is not getting to the note in time when the right hand wants to play it to keep the exercise on time, right? The right hand, if you're closely tuned into the rhythm, then your right hand is going to always want to move with that cadence, especially if you're playing an exercise like that where it's just like straight quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to want to keep that cadence going the entire time, and your right hand's going to try and play. If your left hand hasn't caught up yet, you're going to get the bad note regardless. So you want to play it as slow as possible so that your left hand can get used to keeping up and playing in time and moving that little bit ahead and a little bit ahead and a little bit ahead. And of course, as you play faster and faster and faster, those movements are going to become faster, but also the time that your left hand has to get to where it's got to go, that window is going to become smaller. So you have to be more and more accurate the faster you go, which is why people say that, oh, I can play it good fast, though. No, you can't. You're just muddling through, and that muddle is kind of saving you from seeing what is actually happening critically as you make those motions. So go as slow as you possibly need to play it perfectly, to observe exactly what's going on, and then you can move forwards to going faster and faster. But really, getting the coordination down is like just getting, if you're like tuning your car, you just built a new engine, you've got to tune it so that it idles correctly first, right? If it's sitting in there in the driveway going blah, 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 that's not what you want it to be. You want it to be steady and strong, and it's that coordination of all the parts working together in sync and in time that's going to create a nice clean tone, good technique, and it's going to keep that musical engine in your driveway idling nicely. So pay attention to coordination as well, kind of as an aside of tone, because if your coordination isn't there, you're going to have a really hard time getting the tone right, because your right hand, no matter how good the tone is of your right hand, if your left hand is shortchanging everything you're trying to do, nothing's going to really work out, and it's all going to sound bad. Okay, so those are a couple of obvious things, but when you really get into tone and wanting to have a nice sound, if you want to have a nice tone as you're playing your ukulele, what you're going to need to do is sit and think about different angles and different ways that your fingers can touch the strings, usually with the right hand. Once you're in sync and you're playing 2/3 of the way up the fret, the left hand doesn't have a whole lot to do with tone, as long as it's staying out of the way and not creating those buzzes. But the tone and the projection and the expression is going, and the sound of the notes is going to come from your right hand and how your right hand hits the strings. So I'll start with the thumbnail. That's like my default hand position that I tend to pick with, because I have found that that sounds nice to me. But if I change what I'm doing, what I'm going to do is I'm picking the string there with my thumb just dropping downwards, but my thumb's at like a 45-degree angle to the string. You know, coming in from the right side as I hold my ukulele, my thumb is at like a 45-degree angle. But if I rotate that around so that my wrist bends and I change the angle of attack so that my thumb remains pointed kind of at my belly button the whole time, but I rotate my hand around where my thumb is hitting the string so that my thumb actually ends up pointing kind of backwards towards the bridge, towards my right hip, it sounds like this. And I'll rotate all the way through as I'm picking. And you can hear along the way I have my nail filed. This might not always be the case for everybody if you keep your nail even, but the way that I have my nail filed, you could hear it kind of losing the nail on the end. I'll do it again. Like right there, I lose the nail. Okay, so that's one angle. That is one variation that you can play around with. And there's only so much you want to do here, because if you find that reaching all the way around so that when your thumb is angled back towards your right hip, if you find that that's the best tone, that's still a problem, because you don't want to have your hand positioned like that with your wrist all curled up so your thumb can point backwards. That's not going to be good either. So you want to find kind of the nicest sound within a practical window of how you want to position your hand, right? It's got to kind of be a marriage of two things, of how easy it is to actually physically play and how I like the sound. Those are kind of two different things you've got to consider. But also, you can think about, if I return to my kind of default 45-degree angle position, there's also the vertical angle that you're picking with from where my hand is in relation to the thumb tip as it plucks the string. In my default position, my hand is pretty much letting my thumb be even with the string. So the base of my thumb is level with the string that I'm picking on. And as I play, I'm just dropping my thumb down and pushing my wrist forwards just a little bit so that as I pick through the string, kind of my whole thumb is moving down past the string. I'm not just moving my thumb from my hand. I'm not just wiggling my thumb like I was giving you the thumbs up and then wiggling my thumb, waving my thumb at you. I'm actually moving my whole hand forwards through the string so that I can retain that angle. As I pick through the string, my starting position has a nice angle, and I like the way that my fingernail hits the string. I want to continue that. But if I pick just with my thumb by moving my thumb at the base from my hand, that angle is actually going to change. And in order to retain that angle of the fingernail hitting the string, I need to move my whole hand a little bit through where I'm playing. So as I drop my thumb, I'm also moving my hand forward just a little bit, not a lot, but just enough to kind of retain that angle as it hits the string. But if I don't retain that angle, if I move my hand kind of around my thumb point so that my hand is way above and I have to pick kind of outwards with my thumb, completely different, right? And if I move downwards slowly, that's back to normal. And then if I go way below, now I'm like picking inwards towards the sound hole. That's completely different as well. And once again, physically, these are not going to be ideal at either end of the spectrum. So you want to try and find that happy medium. But that's another angle that you can think about. And then maybe the final one, we kind of have an x-axis, a y-axis, and now the z-axis is going to be kind of the rotation of your thumb as it hits the string, right? I can roll my thumb so that I'm kind of hitting the string across the nail so that the string is like literally just sliding along. The end of my fingernail is sliding perpendicular to the string, sliding along like a bow might on a violin. That's not a very good sound because there's no defined release point off of the thumb. And same going the other way. It just gets ugly. And it becomes harder and harder to get any kind of a sound. It's harder mechanically, it's harder to manipulate the string in that way. But those are your three axes, and I think that, once you have, once you're maybe solidly into the intermediate phase and you're like, oh, I don't know what to practice, I don't know what to do, and you feel like everything you play maybe kind of sounds weak, experiment with those angles and try and see if you can find a position that really works for you. Pay attention to how you file your fingernails. I can't remember if I mentioned this in the last podcast or not, but if you're playing with fingernails, if you want to pick with your fingernails, you need to make sure that you maintain them well. Otherwise, it's going to make your sound worse. Because you can play with the flesh of your finger, and it sounds super clean and nice. It's warm and round. And if I do the same thing with a fingernail, It's a lot brighter. It's a lot more snappy and poppy. But also, if you don't have your fingernail filed nicely, if there's rough edges and stuff, it's going to scrape, it's going to tear, it's going to across the string, and it's going to sound pretty bad. So if you're going to use fingernails, I highly recommend getting a glass nail file to make sure that they're nice and smooth. You file them nicely with a glass nail file. You're going to have to experiment with the shape of your nail because everybody's fingernails are a little bit different the way that they're shaped. Main thing is on the corners, you want to try and round them so there's no harsh edges. Where the nail comes out of your finger, a lot of times it will try and create a little edge there from where you would normally like clip and trim the front of your nail. You want to try and round that so that from the front edge of your nail all the way around to where it goes into your finger is all just one smooth curve. If there's an edge there, it's easy to catch it on the strings, and that's going to sound, kind of bad. I don't really have an edge, that corner on my fingernail, but it's that kind of gross, grabby sound that will be even more emphasized if you actually have that angle there. So glass nail file, or if you don't have a glass nail file, you can use like fine grit sandpaper or a nice emery board. Bad hard grit emery boards, sapphire, diamond, metal files are all garbage as far as I'm concerned. If you want to keep your nails, if you don't want them to rip off, if you want them to have a nice sound, don't use any of those. Use a glass nail file or a fine grit, high grade emery board. Okay, so that's kind of all of the main concepts and aspects of tone that I can think of sharing. There's a lot to explore in there that, will take you years of refinement and trying a little bit different. And, I like the sound of that better. And, now I'm filing my fingernails differently. This is really kind of a personal journey, and nobody, back when I was learning, there was not a whole lot of resources. There were like no ukulele books. There was Hide Kimura's little spiral bound ukulele workbooks that had some tips and tricks, but they were like, very local, probably only at the library kind of books. But that's like all there was. Like, it was a big deal when Roy Sakuma came out with his chord book, and we were able to get our hands on that. It was like, oh wow, it's a big deal. And now there's so many resources, but there's not a lot of resources about like tone. People don't really talk about it because it's not a very sexy part of playing the ukulele. It's kind of boring. It takes a lot of work and practice, but it pays off hugely if you spend some time working on it and thinking about it and playing with it. But just so you have a few more examples and can kind of hear a couple more things, and it's an excuse to use the second mic that I set up to capture the ukulele, I'm going to play one of my songs and just approach the tone in a couple of different ways, if I can think of some variations on how to play it, okay? I haven't played this in a long time, so it's probably kind of rough, but I'll start with going through it one time, kind of just default, kind of bone stock how I would tend to approach something like this just from my intuition of what I've taught myself over the years. This is called The Jig Is Up. Right? That's the idea. That's the main structure of the song. That's on my If Only album. But that's like typical how I would try and express it with the nicest tone I could. But I'm gonna change my picking hand location now and go back towards the bridge, so it's gonna be a little bit more snappy. It's not gonna be as warm. It's gonna be a little bit more like little barking dog kind of sound, and just hear how it changes the presentation and the maybe like the niceness of the song. Like before, what I was trying to go for is just like really invite you in, like a happy kind of upbeat sort of a song that's real pleasant and easy to listen to, and portrays that in its sound. And here I'm going to play the same melody, the same notes, same chords, but with this other style, I imagine it's going to be you're going to want to keep it at a little bit more of an arm's length distance, because it's a little bit more brash. It's a little bit more like, okay, you're kind of talking really loud in my face. Why don't you back up a step, kind of a feel. Right? Very different. I'll do one more, and now I'm going to play up kind of over the fretboard, and I imagine this is going to be like back to that sort of pillowy sound and really like overly warm and dull. See how this contrasts with the happy medium. And then back to stock. I'll just play a little bit of the verse. Right? So that's sort of extremes. And you're going to probably want all those songs in your toolbox, but you need to learn how to use them when, right? Like, let's if I play the bridge, those chord strums can be kind of more warm, and maybe I want to play them a little bit more pillowy. And then when I go to the riff, I move my hand back towards the bridge to get a little bit more of that definition, right? I'll try and exaggerate it. You're going to, as you get more experience, end up moving your right hand all around to kind of capture each note and place each note right where you want it to be. Because in addition to the notes and the chords and the timing, there's also like the touch stuff that helps music come across. It's not just that your favorite ukulele player plays nice notes. I almost guarantee it. They don't play just nice chords. Their timing isn't just good. But it's probably a lot to do with their tone. And if you take that same exact presentation and you put a different tone with it, you probably are not going to like it quite as much, because that tends to be what people gravitate towards. It's like, it's the placement of the notes from like an emotional standpoint. Tone has a lot to do with emotion and how you portray the feel of the note. And if it's more aggressive and bright, or if it's, really super warm and dark, it's going to have a different emotion that comes with that note as you go to play it. So what you want as a musician is to have the full range of colors, the full palette of expressions, and tone has a lot to do with that. So explore, try them all. I present this from where I'm at as a kind of semi-performing musician teacher. And I've reached a place where I'm comfortable thinking about these things and doing them naturally. If you're more of a beginner or an intermediate player, you're not going to do this all in one chunk. You're not going to sit down and have like tone week and all you practice is tone and it's all going to make sense at once. It's not. It's a journey, and it's something where, maybe you spend a little bit of time on it, tuning in your tone for a new song you're working on. And then in another month, you sit down with it a little bit more and you dial it in better. Or, boy, I'm playing this song and I've got most of it down, but it just kind of sounds crappy. Why does it sound like this? Explore the tone. What can you do to change the placement of the notes on that emotional spectrum and that tone spectrum? And just know that you're not going to pick it all up at once. And that, musicians who have put more time into the instrument are going to have a feel for that because they've thought about tone a lot in a lot of different places at a lot of different times during their practice, during their career. And that's what you're hearing. And it's not just like you're going to sit down and you're going to get it all one day and it's all going to make sense and you're going to have perfect tone. It's a journey. It's going to take time. And if you're just starting out, just, by thinking about it, even thinking about it at all is a nice step in the right direction, I think. But don't pressure yourself too much. But, take the time, if you have it, to experiment with the tone. And I think you'll be happy with the results that you end up with, because it impacts everything. And if you can kind of come up with a nice tone or, some contrast to what you're playing, it's that flow that makes the music feel human. It feels dynamic and organic and natural, the way that it moves when you start changing the tone and playing with it and pushing and pulling and, bright, dark, changing what happens. That's really special. And I think that's something we should all try and strive towards. All right, thanks for tuning in. The Live Ukulele podcast is published on the first and third Saturdays of the month. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Leave a review. I know most people are on Apple products listening to podcasts because Apple makes it so easy, but you can listen to podcasts anywhere. Spotify, maybe Spotify doesn't report on my analytics. I don't know. But wherever you're at, whatever you're listening from, thanks for tuning in. And stay in touch. Sign up for my newsletter. Check out liveukulele.com for more learning resources, things like that. And I will catch you in the next episode. Once again, I'm Brad Bordessa. This is the Live Ukulele podcast. See you next time. Hui ho.